Welcome to Advancing Women's Excellence in the Field of Data Analytics. My name is Noha Tohamy. I am with Gartner. I lead our supply chain analytics practice with Gartner, which is a market research firm. I'm delighted to be moderating this panel today. We'll get to hear from a few great analytics practitioners who just happen to be women about their experience working and being in this field. The format of this panel is going to be an introduction by May, Polly, and Nancy, what they do, their current positions, and then I'll kick it off with a few questions. But really the goal is to hear from you guys what questions you have and then have a very interactive discussion. So with that, Nancy, maybe you can introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Nancy Pyron. I have been working in the field of revenue management primarily since 1997. I did some things before that. I graduated with a bachelor's in applied mathematics and then a master's in operations research from Stanford, and that was back in 1990. So I've had a I remember when I graduated with my master's in operations research, I lived in Missouri, and I remember thinking, how am I going to tell people what I do? Because back then it was just you got lists of possible jobs and you sent out physical pieces of paper to hope that you got something. So it was very, very difficult to explain to people who were not in the industry what revenue management or what operations research was and how I could help them. But over the years, I've done everything from work in environmental engineering to logistics to supply chain, revenue management. But for the last 8 years, I've primarily done pricing and revenue management. I was at Starwood and Marriott up through December of last year. And then I have been just doing consulting work and trying to figure out what I want to do next. But I've been doing consulting work for the last couple months.
My name is Polly Mitchell-Guthrie. I work at UNC Healthcare, where I've been for the last year. I lead a team of internal analytical consultants within a larger group, Enterprise Analytics and Data Sciences. Excuse me. Prior to that, I worked for 17 years at SAS, which was a great place to be. And let's see, I have an MBA and an undergraduate degree in political science and women's studies. So I always describe myself as an anomaly or a singularity, depending on your background, because I'm the non-technical person here. When I worked at SAS, my role was to be a mile wide and maybe a few inches deep, because I worked with all the people in advanced analytics R&D who were maybe a mile deep and maybe only an inch wide. You don't need your Bayesian econometrician to know anything about data mining. So I knew a little bit about all of it. So that's my role and my focus.
My name is May Zhang. I'm a senior manager at American Airlines. We have our group about 60 people. I lead the team, support aircraft maintenance engineering. I know it's not a very feminine topic, but my background is in supply chain. So one way or another, that leads me to do that job. I've been there for 16 years. So and before that, I briefly worked with Sabre and I2. I have a PhD from Georgia Tech, Industrial System Engineering, and a geography master's degree from Knoxville, Tennessee, and a math undergrad from the same school as well.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. And maybe continuing on with the introductions, it seems like you all came at analytics from different angles. So maybe we can hear from you a little bit. What led you to that career? Was it just kind of, an accident? Did you look at it and see that there are opportunities out there? So Polly, maybe we can start with you.
I would definitely fall in the accident category. I literally came into analytics because I worked for a series of VPs who kept getting fired. And that's actually not a joke. In fact, excuse me, I'm fighting this cough that won't go away. My former boss at SAS, Radhika Kulkarni, who was here at the conference, some of you may know her. I always say she's the only one ever here in a sorry. But Radhika's husband used to joke with me that he hoped that I would continue the trend of getting my boss fired because he wanted to sue for alienation of infection because she worked too much and he never got to see her. But I never succeeded in getting her fired. So, but I fell into analytics because I literally was working for a VP in a different group. We got reorged. I was told I could find a new opportunity. I knew Radhika. and she was very interested in having a business person work with her. And so I was fortunate in working for Radhika, as well as some other folks who work in advanced analytics R&D, to have an opportunity to learn from some of the best. And I started out a millimeter deep, learning about analytics, and got to work with a lot of people. But one of the things that I really appreciated about working at SAS in general was that SAS has a very good record of having a number of women in very senior positions. When I started, Radhika was the VP of Advanced Analytics. The head of product management was a woman. Some of you may know Kathy Lang, who works for SAS, who leads analytical, pre-sale. It changes all the time, but anyhow, leads a group of technical people on the sales organization. So there's a number of women in leadership positions at SAS, and that was a great precedent.
Okay. Great. Nancy?
I think that I went into it because I didn't know any better. I started out in engineering at a small engineering school in Missouri that I was still living at home, and decided I was going to be a rock star. That didn't work out, but I went to North Texas State to study music, and ended up getting a degree in math. And when I first started, I also didn't know what I wanted to do. My brother was in D.C. and he was in the Navy, and he's like, well, if you come out to Crystal City, I'm sure you can get a job with a DoD contractor. So I did that for a couple of years. That was 87, 88, in that time frame. And I realized after working for a Department of Defense contractor that a lot of the issues that I saw were due to attempted design and build at the same time. There wasn't sufficient testing. There wasn't sufficient quantification of what issues were before they were trying to build the next stage. And so they had to do a lot of rework and a lot of budget overruns. So I started looking at degree programs where I could figure out what tools were needed in order to figure out what the right thing was, as opposed to a lot of the statistics that I had looked at were, here's a set of tools, use these tools. And just pure math was, I'm not a theoretical mathematician, I'm an applied mathematician. And so I settled on operations research because I found that it was, at least the way they described it in a lot of the documentation, and I'd had a course in my undergraduate, was here's a set of tools, but here's a different ways to think about those tools, and find the right tool in order to fit the thing that you have the problem for. So you can solve very, very small problems and create a large solution. So that's really what prompted me into operations research. And from there, it was, how do I use this degree in the most effective way possible? And I've had a really interesting, as I said, a really interesting spectrum of jobs. I work for the Department of Energy doing environmental decision analysis to determine how to budgetize based on what's going to kill us the first thing, to everything to that, to trying to figure out how groundwater was going to work with hydrogeologists to figure out how the probabilistic spread of groundwater contamination in order to do risk analysis, to at Starwood, we built the entire revenue management system, was responsible for the analytics for rebuilding that system from the ground up. So it's just been this really, really interesting spectrum of jobs and opportunities. And I will say that, my very first job when I was at the Department of Defense, and I was actually supporting the Air Force, and I was working in the Pentagon, and they wanted me to go get coffee, and I'm like. And we would have these team meetings, and I was the only woman out of 42 men in this company. And every time they referred to me as the blonde chick, because nobody knew my name, but I had dyed my hair blonde, and they knew I was the blonde chick. And so that was obviously a very long time ago. But they wanted me to get coffee, and I refused to get coffee. And my mom and I had this huge argument. And my mom's like, "Why don't you just get him coffee?" And I'm like, "I am not going to set the precedent." And so it was, now that I think about it, people are like, "Oh," and I'm like, "No, you don't understand." Like, even 15 years after that, even in the early 90s, I got performance reviews that were, I expected more. And I'm like, wait a second, you gave me this rating because you expected more? Like, did you tell that to these other 4 guys in the group? Well, no. And I'm like, I was the only one that was billable. I was the only one that went out and got my own work. I was the only one that did this. I was the only one that did that. And yet you expected more. So this was still even in the early 90s where there was just this huge divide between, I won't say there was a pay divide, but I will say that there was a definite divide between the expectations of how hard I had to work just to appear, in the acceptable category versus the guys that were around me. So I can say that from my perspective, the difference now between what it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago is huge, because again, I worked in a lot of male-dominated industries in the Department of Energy, Department of Defense, highly technical companies that were, one woman, I was the only female out of 15 or 20 guys sort of thing. But I think that always being strong, never, not being aggressive in an inappropriate way, but just being firm, resolute, and always backing everything up with facts. Because, anything you do, if you can't prove it, then it's an emotional response, which you take that in stride, right? Because any argument can use for and against, but everything you do, you back it up, you present it in such a way that it is non-arguable, that if they don't draw the same conclusion, then they're, obviously not competent to be in that job. But I can say that over the years, I have seen such a growth in the acceptance and the capabilities and the overall positive attitude towards women and where we sit in the organizations and where our role models are. At Marriott when I left, like half the senior executives were women, which is a huge leap above in a lot of organizations. So I think that many organizations have stopped saying, oh, that's a woman, she's going to go in this role, which is literally what it was back in the 80s and 90s, to, oh, this is the qualifications and this is where I see this person and I can see the value here.
Great, thank you. So we've heard a lot at the event about the sponsor versus the mentor, and how it's really important to have these two roles professionally. The mentor is more of an advisor, maybe somewhat of an informal relationship that you have, advising about work, about life-work balance, whereas the sponsor is usually someone who's in the same track as you are, more senior, your boss maybe, to kind of help you with the advancement within your career. I'm wondering if a sponsor or a mentor comes to mind that had a very big impact on your career.
I have, I would go back to when I was in grad school, so a little bit of my history. So when I was in middle school, I really fall in love with geography. And when I come here for my undergrad, at the beginning, I couldn't really speak a lot of English. So I ended up taking a lot of math class and end up having a math degree as undergrad. But when I was in graduate school, I went back to geography, and I had a couple of professors there. They're one way or another, they believed in me more than I believed for myself, and I was still very, very shy and speak very broken English. But they saw a lot in me in a way, and I think it just encouraged me to pursue what I wanted to do. Like, it was my dream since I was a little girl, and it was now very. Even my dad had this argument with me, this is not the right career for you. It's, he come from a different time and all that. But I think the professors really showed me what things can be, what I can do, and then believed in me. So from that point, and I went to Georgia Tech for my PhD degree. I don't remember I ever go to a meeting thinking I'm not as good. So it gave me that confidence to go on with, the rest of my career. So that was really helpful. And one of them, the professor is Dr. Lewis in the next couple rooms down from the University of Tennessee. So that program is really, really good. So that's my mentor.
That's excellent. What about the sponsor, Polly?
I can't say I've ever had a sponsor the way Diane Bryant was describing it yesterday, for those of you who went to that session. But I certainly have had mentors, both sort of more formal and informal. Radhika was a great boss to have at SAS. I certainly appreciated working with her. Keith Collins, the CTO at SAS, was a great leader to me. I remember at one point, several years ago, SAS was getting beat up because people were saying in the market, and when they were beating him up, he would go to meetings with banking CIOs, and they would say SAS didn't do machine learning. And he knew that SAS had been doing machine learning for years. There's some algorithm I dug out that Jim Goodnight had written in the 80s, K nearest neighbor, I think, in the 80s. So SAS had certainly been doing machine learning before anybody called it that. But he asked me to write something up around, write up a web page on SAS doing machine learning. And I was like, well, Keith, I'm not technical writing. He was like, good, even better. You can speak to the people who don't, know what you're talking about. So I had to go sit around with a bunch of people and work on that project. And the point is that he saw something in me that I wasn't sure I saw in myself. Similarly, I can also point to Ann Robinson. Some of you may know Ann from Informs, but Ann, as the person who first got me involved in Informs, felt like my perspective could be useful in Informs. And again, coming as a non-technical person, that was something I needed somebody to sort of encourage me to do. And then similarly, when I was talking to her about next move in my career a few years ago, she said that she thought I should lead an analytics team. And I said, well, Ann, I wasn't sure I could do that, and also being a non-technical person, she said, absolutely you can do that, way more than a lot of team leaders I know. And so I appreciated her believing in me. So I think having somebody believe in you and see something in you that you're not sure you're confident of. And what I would say about confidence, I can't remember the exact citation, but a group at Harvard focused on computer science did a study several years ago where they found that men who had 0 to 1 year of programming experience had the same level of confidence as women who had 8 years of programming experience. 8 years versus the men who had 0 to 1 year. And so what I would say is that it's very important, if you think you're not sure you can do something, there's probably a man next to you who may have equal or lesser experience than you who thinks that he can. So the point is that not that he's any better than you may even have more experience than he does, but don't be afraid to put yourself out there. I think studies have shown that women will look at a job description and think, oh, well, I can only do 90% of that, I better not apply. And a man will think, well, I can do 10% about that, I can definitely apply. And so the point is to reach beyond your comfort zone and to believe you can do things because other people are willing to do that and you should too.
Great. Wonderful. So Nancy, let's kind of flip the question over. You said that about 50% of the executives at the Marriott were women. Talk about what you've seen there in terms of those executives mentoring, making themselves, as well as yourself, of course, making yourself available to younger women in this space and helping them out at the beginning of their career.
So I think I was with Starwood for 6 years and then Marriott for 1. And I think at both companies, the facility to the open door policy for senior executive women being available to other women was definitely, well, in the hotel industry, I don't know if any of you have worked in the hotel industry, but I worked in technical fields for years, and then I went to the hotel industry, and I would get these emails back from people going, why are you so mean? And I'm like, I wasn't mean, I was just answering your question. So I had to completely rethink the way I even sent responses because everybody's just so nice. They're just so nice. The executives are nice. Everybody's very nice. So it's a very weird place to be. But it was the women I found to be not only very nice and very intelligent and knowledgeable, but very willing to provide a foundation and a resource. I still have women that I worked with 8 years ago who just send me an email if you have a question. I have no problem answering it. So it's that supportive nature of, we know that as we build together, we can build a stronger foundation than if we're each competing against each other. So I think that is one of the founding tenets I've looked at for where I go and people that I work with, and not just women, but also men who are willing to really look beyond any sort of racial or gender biases and look at the qualities and the skill sets that people have and be willing to support. And I think that I was lucky in that my personality type was, the more you tell me I can't do something, the harder I'm going to do it. And so in those beginning years when I kept getting told I couldn't do something, it just pushed me to be more independent and more firm in my commitment. And I can totally resonate with what you just said, because when I was in my master's program, I interacted with a lot of just absolutely brilliant people at Stanford, and I'd always thought I was smart until I went there. But it was people who had 13 had gotten perfect scores on SATs and stuff like that. So, but one of the guys that I was talking with, we were talking about how we approach tests. I was like, well, I go through the test questions and I figure out which ones I know I can do, and then I work those, and then I go to the next ones. And he's like, I've never thought I couldn't do a question on a test. And he, granted, 20 years old, and he was in his third year of his PhD, so he was obviously brilliant. But just him saying that changed how I approached problems. Because if you automatically start with that, I wonder if I can do it, or am I capable of doing it, which I don't think it's just women, but I do think it's more prevalent in women, where we question and we say, oh, I'm only skilled up to this level. But as soon as you allow that doubt to enter your mind, then the people around you are going to doubt you. So the more confidence you can, even if it's fake it till you make it, if you believe in yourself and you believe a solution will come, you will figure it out, that attitude changes your outcome. And so it's believing in yourself, believing that things will happen. And, if you talk to most of the men that you work with in organizations that have taken a chance, they're like, oh yeah, I didn't actually know I could do it. I said, I'm going to do this. And that's what you have to do. A lot of the time, you just have to take that step. You have to believe you're going to do it, even if you only have 50% of the skill set, even if you only know a third of what you think you need to know. Believe that you are going to be successful, and success will come. And every now and then you're going to fail, but in that failure, you're also going to learn. And I've never had a failure that I didn't learn from, and actually it became a huge success later on, because I took that failure and I understood what happened and I grew from that. So, I just have to reiterate what she said. Don't question yourself. Believe you will do it, you will succeed, and just make it happen. Don't dither around and wonder how you're going to make it happen and just scare yourself to death. Just believe it's going to happen and approach it with confidence, and your brain will kick in. It really will. It's all in there. You just have to let it go.
One of the issues, or one of the topics that I'm conflicted about, is this whole idea of needing to be one of the boys to belong. If you're in a meeting and the men are aggressive, then be aggressive. If they're swearing, then go ahead and swear. And on one hand, I understand that, you're part of the minority right now, and you just have to, belong up until the point where you get to represent, who you are. And women in general, we have different styles, but still, it's very effective most of the time. So, Polly, I wonder, what do you think about that? Is this the right strategy, to be one of the boys until you prove yourself, or should you be true to your style and yourself from the beginning?
So, how many people here heard Diane Bryant's talk at the Worms reception yesterday? Looks like maybe 2/3 of you. So she told a story about that when she first was an engineer at Intel, that it was a cussing, drinking, kind of a crowd, and somebody cussed and then looked at her and apologized, and she felt like her only response was to jump in and sort of cuss back as often and more as they did, just to show that she could do that. And so I think that statement, to me, felt like it reflected a little bit of a different era, where that was more what was expected of women, and particularly in a hard-driving engineering culture. I don't feel like that is as much the expectation. I think there's a little more tolerance for women being women. I can certainly say at SAS, I was in countless meetings where not only was I the only one that wasn't technical, but I was often the only woman in meetings. Even though SAS has a lot of women, there still were plenty of meetings I was in where I was the the only woman. But I didn't feel the need to act differently as a woman. I always feel like the best thing to do is just to be yourself. And now perhaps some of that comes from the fact that I'll say that I'm also a lesbian, and so I've never felt the need to be closeted, because I feel like if I'm just myself and comfortable with who I am, then my experience has been that people are generally comfortable around me. If I make a big deal about that, then people are generally far more uncomfortable. So that probably has affected my lens and the way I think about being in the world. I show up as who I am, and people can lump it or leave it. And if they don't like it, it's probably not a good place for me to be anyhow, and I might choose to leave it because that might not be a place I want to be. So.